Hey Broken Tea Society, I'm Jon Tattersall. I'm here at Full Swing's headquarters in Carlsbad, California, and we're talking about how to release the golf club, or ways to release the golf club. We're constantly trying to find out more about this subject, and like many things in golf, it's definitely one of the overtaught things. So here are some thoughts on what I think the release should be. A couple of things I want to point out. First of all, this is a driver, it could be any iron. The golf club, when you swing a golf club, doesn't rotate around the handle. It rotates around its center of mass. And the center of mass you can find pretty easily. Just hold it here and figure out where does a club balance. Now technically, super nerdy, it's not quite on the shaft, which is a concept that's a little tough for me to get to, but all the weight of this club bounces somewhere down here in space. So everything you do to the grip is balancing around that point. Okay, so if we understand that, now the release becomes more relevant. Now, if you're doing a pretty good job and you tend to overdraw the ball, the first part's more for you. So if you're doing a pretty good job and from down the line view, when you swing the golf club, you've pivoted well, you're on a pretty good plane, the club is, as it's above the hands, it's inside the hands, so that will be my definition of it's shallow enough. And as you come down, it's still inside the hands. Once the club gets below the handle, generally in good players, you'll see the club start to track out towards the golf ball. So that would be over history. If you look at best players, above the hands, it's inside the hands. Below the hands, it's outside the hands. Great. So we used to draw these swing plane lines on the video so we could see the swing plane. And I've had hundreds of players over the years that are on plane, look perfect, the face looks square, and they hit hooks. And so we'd spend so much time worrying about swing plane. Once I understood where the club was actually rotating around, the release made a lot more sense. So when the player is coming down, the point at which it's releasing around or rotating around is this point. Because it's got a club head on it, the club head is also trying to square. The engineers are trying to help you square the golf club. So if you're a drawer of the golf ball, this is what's happening. The club's coming down, it's trying to pass you, and it's trying to close. So the release for a good player, and we know this is what players are doing, they are coming down, they are trying to now manage the amount of closing that's going on. Okay? This is happening, it's trying to pass them, it's trying to close, and now they are doing things at the grip to try and make sure the club doesn't overclose, it doesn't shut down on you. When you're on a launch monitor, a lot of times it will tell you whether you're hitting up or down, it tells you where the face is. If I get the face closing down too much, it will tell me I've closed the face, so then you're trying to open the face up more. It may have just closed too much. We know from the shaft manufacturers the amount of rotation of the club is massive. It's somewhere between, on tour, between 2,000 degrees per second of closing and 4,000 degrees per second. So if you think that you can get down here and kind of manage that, again, absolutely no chance of managing. You're trying to anticipate, as you come down, you know your pattern if you're a drawer, you're trying to anticipate how much of that release do I need with almost feeling, this is a feel I give good players, you're trying to feel like the grooves of the club go to the sky on the way through. So a good player's release for me is this way. Okay, that's how the club squares up, that's angular momentum, we need that speed. We can't stop a hook effectively by trying to hold the club back. So you'll see a lot of this from players where they're scared of a hook, they try and hold the club back. It's either way right or they can't hold it and now it just snaps over on them. So a snap hook is literally, you get the club so far out of position, it rapidly closes over on you. So those are issues a good player is dealing with. If you draw the ball, that's what you're trying to do. If you're trying to work around those issues. The club is designed to pass you and the club is designed to close. Those are kind of non-negotiables. So for the good player, the drawer of the ball, how do you come down? You're trying to let the club pass you without getting too much face rotation. So take a look at your swing. If you're coming down and the club head is inside the hands from down the line, when it's above your hands, it's trying to close. As it comes down, once it gets down in here, if it's below the hands, it should be moving out. If you're trying to stop a draw by doing that, you cannot play. I mean, you're going to hit high rights and occasionally it's going to snap hook on you. So don't prevent a hook with a hold. Try and slow down the amount of rotation. When I was growing up, I thought a release was that. A release is much more of That sensation. The club is going this way and the head is not closing over very much. So that's how to stop it overdrawing. Generally a good player issue. Even if you think you're slicing a bit, play around with this because you may just be holding it too late coming down. When we're talking about release, this information comes from talking to engineers at shaft manufacturers. So I'd love to tell you this is information that I came up with. This is actually asking the engineers what's happening when you swing a golf club with the golf shaft. And for me, that's incredibly important to understand, because if that's what's happening, we can't change that, but then we can build feels around it. So what they tell me is happening, the club, as you come into impact, you imagine you've got speed in the grip. So we're coming down, we're trying to put speed into the grip. The best players in the world, or nearly everybody actually, the maximum speed in the grip is somewhere in this area on the way down, like 8 o'clock on a clock face. From that point to impact, there's a dramatic slowing of this end of the shaft. The top part of the shaft is almost backing up. Okay, now if I do that and I pivot well, it doesn't look like it's backing up. But just imagine we're trying to take energy from the body and get it to the club head, ultimately get it to the golf ball. So if I'm coming down on the golf swing, I'm doing what I was taught when I was very young, how do we create lag? I've got a very fast grip speed here, but not a very fast head speed. And the golf ball does not care what my grip speed is, it does care what the club head speed is. So if you can think about, you're trying to, this is what I tell good players, you're trying to get the shaft in line. You're not trying to particularly lean the shaft. The reason it looks like it's leaning, it hasn't quite lined up yet. And with the better players, the pivot is working very hard. So they've moved from the trail leg to the lead leg. But the club is kind of really moving almost this direction. Now when it hits the ball, it looks like that because the head dramatically slows. But if you're trying to release the club and you think that this is a release, you're never getting speed to the club head. You may be coming from a pretty good spot coming down, but if you're holding the head back like this, trying to release it late or trying to lean the shaft, you'll tend to hit the golf ball to the right. So the release of the shaft is very late. And if it's going to the right, what a lot of people are saying is, okay, now you've got to flex your wrist. So now you have the club face closed. The club is late. Once it twists over, you've got a massive hook. And so try and get the shaft, what I would say, lined up. That's a release. How do we line the shaft up through impact? With a good pivot, it doesn't look like it's doing this, but that's what the shaft is technically trying to do. It's trying to get the center of mass to pass the grip, passing the line of force, and it's doing this as a club head, and that's speed, and that's how it squares up there for you. So please experiment with that, but be okay with the fact that the grip is technically slowing through impact. We don't quite know yet how people are doing that. I think that they are actually putting the brakes on the grip. There is some slowing of the grip by the fact the head does this. We know it's happening, that's what the engineers tell us is happening. Our job is to figure out how to feel that happening. But if you're trying to come down and hold like that, you're never getting speed to the head, you're not squaring the shaft appropriately, so you're getting short and crooked, not long and straight. Okay, so the other shot shape that a lot of us, I help a lot of people with this, but a lot of people struggle with this, is you're slicing the golf ball. You're hitting the ball for a right-handed golfer, starting maybe on line or slightly left of target and cutting to the right. You'll tend to see the spin numbers are higher when you do that. You'll tend to see the ball isn't very penetrating with its flight. It's kind of climbing and curving right. And honestly, that's the reason I have a job for a lot of people. That's something we're trying to get away from. And so when you look down the line on video, you will tend to see in that situation, the club head somehow is traveling out too soon relative to how much the arms are traveling down in the downswing. So for me, I'm trying to get players to move the pivot appropriately, linear, with the arms dropping down here in front of them. So more of a, if you've seen Justin Rose do the drill he does, it's phenomenal. He's staying close to the target and lowering his arms. If you're a slicer, that's a phenomenal drill to try and work on. You cannot really overdo that as long as you feel like you've got some push from right foot to left foot, trail leg to lead leg, as you lower your arms. But if you're wondering what happens, why do you slice it in that situation? Again, the center of mass is somewhere down here. I've got the club head over here, so as I apply force to that grip, The mass of the club is always chasing the force. So if the club head is out here, now it's working down like that. It's falling that way. And as you can see from that example, there's no squaring going on. If I get the club head inside the hands and let it come down, that action is squaring the club face, and it's squaring the shaft. Once it's coming from here, it's falling this way like this. A gross example, but that's what's happening essentially. Most golfers, when that's happening, you're trying to fix the club shaft and roll the wrist this way. It's not the right way to do it, unfortunately. You really want to feel as though you're doing more just in rows. You're up here. As we talked about, you're shifting across, but you're creating room for your arms to descend. The arms have to come down in the downswing. They went up in the backswing. They've got to come back down. And now the club head is traveling that way, which is helping square things for you. So no matter what you're feeling, this mass is always trying to line up with this force. So if you're out here early, it's lining up that way. If you're coming from here, it's lining up that way. And if you're this person, trying to twist the grip really doesn't help us very much. I'd much prefer you work on just in rows drill. Try and keep your body coiled. Try and get your arms down. Now the club has got a chance to square in this direction. There is much more in the golf swing of this squaring and very little of twist squaring that the golfer is trying to do. This would be really in case of emergency, but try and promote this squaring. There's been a really interesting evolution of grips over the years. When I grew up, we were taught to grip the club in what I would consider now a much weaker area. The grips would have there was actually a grip years ago that had a pattern on the grip to show you where your thumb went and where your right hand went. And it would be, by modern consideration, very, very weak grip. Almost like you couldn't see the FJ there. It would be turned way to the left and the right hand would be on top like that. You may see some tour pros with that grip now. Unlikely, very unlikely. When I'm looking at recreational players, they tend to get this grip going on. The left hand is around to the left, it's too much in the palm, but the right hand looks very strong, and they'll hit hooks, so then they try and weaken this hand. What I would prefer is the right hand is more on top, it's definitely in the fingers, and it's turned to the right. So when I grew up, that type of grip would be somebody's going to hook it. Now we know from how the club is moving, and they're trying to square the shaft, they're not really trying to rotate the club as much. They're actually trying to fight the rotation. This grip works for tour players now, and this is not just players that are taking lessons. There's a number of players on tour that really don't have a coach, and they've figured out if they can release it in that fashion, they can go as hard as they want. So what I call that is kind of a release fade. You're swinging the club past you, but you're not letting the club twist. You're truly trying to hold it from doing this. Years ago, we were told, okay, if you don't want the club to twist much, you grip it in a weaker fashion, and there really isn't enough force that I can apply to that club to stop it from twisting. The twist is quite violent for a good player, so you see much more of this grip now. With recreational players, I'd love to see this grip, left hand more to the right, and almost kind of an opposing feel. So if you felt like you were trying to squeeze the shaft and wring the shaft, your wrists are opposing each other like that. So this hand is pushing against this hand's pushing against that hand. The reason I want that, when we look at players on 3D and we look at the best drivers of the golf ball, the amount of hinge to the right, hinge to the left isn't much more than that. The amount of wrist set up and the wrist set down isn't much more than that. So they're really opposing those forces. Recreational players, I'll sometimes see this grip like over to the left, like I said, and the right hand gets underneath. The problem with that is generally now the right hand does too much. So it takes away the ability to get the body to help me take the club back. It becomes just much more of a pickup scenario and a slam down scenario. So try and feel like you're trying to oppose. If this was, I'm just trying to hold that club between my hands. If I apply equal and opposite pressure, that club now is pretty stable between my two hands. And that's what we're trying to encourage, and that's what the best players do. And they don't, it's called a grip. They're not just holding it, they're gripping it. And they're trying to oppose the club from doing what it wants to do. They're trying to make sure the face and the shaft line up as well as possible that direction, and minimal of this. I know that's happening. They're trying to minimize that and maximize that. So The grip I'd like everybody to do is let your arm kind of hang, let it twist in. This hand is right of center. This hand is at least equal to it, or maybe a bit this direction. But feel once you're gripping the club, it's a grip, and you're opposing to keep that head and shaft as stable as possible between your arms.